Welcome to this podcast. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking about Venus in Scorpio. Now, I make a lot of Scorpio videos, and that's because Scorpio is the most enigmatic sign of the zodiac. It is also the most difficult. And if you've been listening to my podcasts on Scorpio, you would understand why I conclude it is the most difficult. And the reason has to do with unity. You see, Scorpio is concerned with a task that is very difficult to implement on Earth. Why? Well, simply because we cannot see into each other's heads. Now, each human being manifests on Earth as some type of closed entity, a unique vantage point that cannot really be experienced by another. Nobody knows what it is like to be you. Nobody will ever know what it is like to be you. You are essentially cut off from sharing that experience, really, in a very precise and accurate way with anybody else. You are essentially trapped in your own universe. And most people don't really understand what this means. They believe that somehow their experiences carry on outside of them, or that they're able to experience other realities. But the seemingly, often missed truth is that all of your experiences come from within you. They are all internally generated, and it doesn't matter what the experience is, really. Think of any type of experience. Think of anything. Have a thought. Go as far as thinking about aliens all the way to unicellular bacteria. Whatever thought pops into your head, it is your construction. It is your creation. And it can only be experienced in its true qualitative form by you. Now, if you have to share that experience, that thought with someone else, you're going to have to communicate. The problem with communication is that it is representative. And so every representation is a reduction. So that when you try to reduce the thought you have had to something so basic that you can capture the intricate details of that thought, you have no choice but to reduce it. Because that thought does not happen in some type of empty space. There is a feeling, there are feelings attached to that thought. And the feeling that is principally attached to the thought is what it feels like to be you. And that's not something that you can really explain to someone else. Everybody has this. Everybody's experiencing this. Because the content of a self starts from the creation of that self. And it's one of the first things that we learn to do as human beings. We learn to give self an identity. And if you think this is not an easy process, people are starting to figure that out when they try to teach artificial learning agents what it feels like to have a self. It's impossible. It's so complex. But human beings do it because we have the machinery between our ears to be able to do it. And it seems to do this readily. So whatever a human being is something that learned how to create or conjure up this sense of self within it as a construct. Now, it is something that human beings do very well. No other creature on this planet really does it well. Okay? So, Scorpio's fundamental problem is that it is frightened of this unique solitary experience. Because what it really is that aspect of existence, of awareness, self-awareness, that wants to merge with another. It does not want to remain confined within this solitary bubble, wherein which it cannot really share what it is with another person. Scorpio wants to know what it is like to be you. It doesn't just want to know, it wants to be you. It wants you also to be it. And that way the human is able to eliminate mistrust, deception, misdeeds, and all the things that plague human beings come from this ability not to know what is accurately in your head. And the reason why this happened, if you've been listening to my podcasts in the past, is because Scorpio does not know how to deal with duality. And the reason why this is the case is because Scorpio is that primal memory. That is, if you want to call it a memory, that is, not memory in the way that we think of it today. But Scorpio is that primal instinct that reminds self that it is non-dual. It is unitary. It is a unit. It has always been a unit. It has always been a reconciliation of duality, meaning it has always been male-female. Now, when Scorpio is born into the world, the symmetry is broken. So it has to choose to be one thing. It has to incarnate as one thing, which is half of a dual. Okay? Now, this feeling is very traumatic to the Scorpio because the Scorpio retains the memory of unity. And so the life of Scorpio is spent trying to get back to unity. And one of the ways in which Scorpio does this is the pursuit of the orgasm. Because what the orgasm is a nullification of that aspect of self-awareness that we call the ego. Because what happens is the ego is basically a reminder that you are in a solitary kind of environment, having a solitary kind of experience, wherein all you can experience are your own thoughts and feelings. You cannot really experience another's. And this drives Scorpio mad. So Scorpio is always trying to nullify this. The reason why it wants to do this is so that it can have a glimpse of its original source, the source code, unity. And so it pursues the orgasm because during the orgasm, the ego is suspended in what the French call petit mort. You know, it's a little death, basically, where you let go of everything and you become nothing for an instant. Now, so it's not just about pleasure. It's the fact that in this moment, Scorpio can let go of something which it feels blocks it from being able to access unity. And once Scorpio achieves this union with unity, it's able to bring down something. And this is the reason why it pursues the orgasm. It's able to bring down what can only be described as a post-orgasmic reality, which is what we find in Sagittarius. It's a very specific type of knowledge access or wisdom access, not the kind that you would necessarily go to study in school. But I don't want to go into all that now. You'd have to, come take my classes. I offer classes where I teach the fundamentals of natal chart synthesis in ways that, you haven't heard anywhere else. I can guarantee that, So that is the fundamental challenge of Scorpio. So the way that Scorpio relieves this is, this pressure that it feels is through the orgasm. And that's why Scorpio is the most difficult sign. Because it's not just about the orgasm. It is the process by which it acquires that orgasm. Because that process determines how deep or how effective this connection to the source really is. And so what Scorpio looks for in individual partners or in potential partners is those who can serve as the best vehicle to this source. And when they find that one that allows them to touch the source more readily, more completely, then it becomes an obsession holding on to that source, because then something else kicks in. What if this source disappears? What if they leave me? What if they move on? What if they find someone else? And this is as traumatic to Scorpio as the connection itself, or as the fact that it is alone. And so you see that the problem within Scorpio really is a simultaneous one, because they are absolutely drawn to the source and they are repelled by it because of the fear of losing that connection. So for Scorpio, it's not just the problem is not just having access to something, it's how do you keep it forever? Especially when I can't see inside your head, especially when I don't know what it is like to be you. What if you are deceiving me? What if you're lying to me? What if you're betraying me? And so the Scorpion is driven to investigate. They're driven to try to figure out what is underneath. Well, the drive, I've basically just explained to you where the primordial instinct is coming from. So any person that you know that has significant Scorpio placements This is what's going on in their head. They're just not aware of it. Some of them are able to articulate it to a certain sense. But to really understand the mechanism that drives this, you can summarize it as being what? A fear of death, and yet simultaneously drawn to death, because in death, everything is revealed. The veil of reality is pulled away, and you are back with the source. So Scorpio is walking around as an emotionally intense contradiction that they harbor within themselves. And once Scorpio rises, for instance, or you have significant placements, the life theme revolves around the reconciliation of this powerful duality. Now, Venus, on the other hand, is, you'd often hear in astrological texts as the the goddess of love, etc., attraction and all that. Well, here we don't do buzzwords. We don't do superficiality. Astrological reality is too serious for superficial constructs, okay? Now, it depends on how you like to understand things. Here, we like to understand things from first principle. And when we come into the realm of Venus, we're really coming into the construction of a material reality, the very first stages of the construction of a material reality. And to fully understand what that means, you need to understand what it is like to be. Okay? Now, prior to the existence of a material reality, beingness doesn't have a problem. You can just be because you always are. You never worry about it. You never think about it. It never bothers you. It never really occurs to you what that means. I'll give you an example. Apart from human beings, almost all creatures on this planet have no sense of what it is like to be them. They never think about it. It's not a question of, maybe they have a little bit of sense. It never occurs to a bird that it's a bird. It never occurs to your cat that it is a cat. It doesn't know what a cat is. A bird doesn't know what a bird is. A gorilla doesn't know what a gorilla is. So they never, ever, ever have that instinct to stop and wonder what they are. Now, the reason why I'm very confident of this statement is because if they did, then they can choose to stop being that. So, your cat can suddenly decide of its own accord that it doesn't want to be a cat anymore. First of all, it will have to come to a realization of what a cat is, and then it would have to associate itself to that. Do you realize how difficult this is cerebrally? People now realize how difficult these things are because they're trying to teach artificial learning agents these simple concepts, and they find out that these concepts are not so simple at all. We take so much of it for granted, all right, because the way that we construct the reality is like Russian dolls, okay? We embed one reality in another and create an unimaginable amount of complexity. That's what we do, but we don't realize it because we are equipped to deal with that. So, Venus, right, is the first instinct to materialize the concept of being. And it's the instinct is brought about because you're born into a material world, so that the sense of being can no longer sustain you. You have to be something physically, meaning you have to have a physical structure, a kind of boundary that is different from other people's boundary, that's different from where you can reference a being as this or that. And it is for that reason that the Venusian concept comes into being. Now, the problem with this arrangement is that it faces one unique problem, very unique, in the sense that what does it feel like to be a separate entity? And the only way that it can define that is to give quality to that separateness. And a human being, or most creatures, they do that through the material senses. So that what Venus really describes is the way that it describes the material senses themselves and the way that those material senses are able to shape the qualitative nature of a reality experience. That's really what it is. And so what Venus really is the sense of being that is flowing through your material senses. And the Venusian quality, because of the stage that it's in, right, is only concerned about one qualitative type of experience as the most primitive form of that material sensation. Do I like it? Or do I not like it? Does it make me comfortable? Does it not make me comfortable? And the primary vehicle for assessing this very primordial instinct of sensuality is the sense of taste. Because infants are born with the natural instinct to suckle. So that sense of taste is very well developed at birth. That's why infants suckle. Okay? And if you give an infant something that doesn't taste nice, they're going to scream. Because that is the Venusian aspect of self that is operating at that stage. It's not very well developed. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to be able to qualitatively separate what is comfortable, pleasurable from what isn't. And it is upon that that it now builds the edifice of, in Virgo and in Capricorn. Okay? And it is this quality that Venus has with Taurus, because Venus really is the Taurian experience. Okay? So, as the individual develops the sense of self further by integrating these material senses into the feeling of oneness, it learns that in order to there are certain attributes that are associated with that which is pleasurable. And some of the attributes are, there is a certain type of symmetry that we consider to be beautiful, because the way things look in terms of, vision is part of the material senses, right? And so human beings are attracted to a sense of proportionality and symmetry, which we call beauty, harmony, right? They're also attracted to that tonally, because when you listen to certain sounds that appear more pleasurable to a human ear than others, and that's where music comes from. The same way certain foods taste, the combination of certain spices or the combination of certain flavors or tastes. Also the same thing with smell. For some people, they have this heightened sense of touch. Certain things, they feel them better than others. All different quality. Now, these experiences all go to contribute to calibrate a very specific type of sensorial experience that each and everybody has, depending on where Venus is in their natal and the condition of that Venus. So Venus now becomes the sense of bringing like things together in a way that is very harmonious, pleasurable, and beautiful. So that it is the nature of the internal awareness of things, how they are constituted from a sensorial perspective, and if these things can blend together. So people who, you know that your Venus is very active when you're really, interested in matching colors, or, the beauty of things, the way things look. If you have this sense of aesthetics that qualify your reality very uniquely, you've always known that you're like that. And each and everybody has their own unique perspective regarding this. A Venus in Aries is very different from a Venus in Cancer. Okay? Now, so that's the nature of Venus. Now, we now need to bring this into the realm of Scorpio, because most people don't realize, and this is one of the things I teach in my classes, when a planet, which I call a functional light, because that's what planets really are, when a planet is located in a sign, all it simply means is that the sign must produce the effects of that planet. And the planet has a pure form, in a sense. All right? That is just very, very conceptual, because nobody can really experience the pure form of a planet. We can intuit what the pure form is by watching the way it behaves in all the signs. Okay? The commonality it has as it manifests in all the signs. So we can intuit what the pure form should be. But the pure form, nobody will ever experience it, because the functional light itself, the planet itself, is always located in a sign. And when it is located in a sign, it is basically describing to you how the sign produces the pure form of that planet. So Scorpio, as we have described it, needs to produce this form of Venus. Now remember what Scorpio is. Scorpio comes after Libra for a reason. In Libra, you get to negotiate. And what you're negotiating in Libra is the reality space that each and every individual carries in their head. That space that is solitary and unique to the individual. It can't really be shared. Libra is our human attempt at sharing what it is like to be us. Okay? And it has to be done under certain types of conditions. Those conditions are the Libran perspective. Okay? Now, but when you get to Scorpio, the initial sharing and social interaction has taken place, meaning the spaces have negotiated a kind of order, a structure. It is very unique between different types of reality spaces. And that's why each and every person that you know has a different version of who you are. They cannot have the same because the interaction, the modes are very different. They have to be, because what you're dealing with is very conceptual and it's internalized. It can't really be shared. So that Libra is the experience of which part of you actually comes out. Well, in Scorpio, that part of you that you've managed to bring out now needs to sink deep into a reality, to really literally to connect that part of you that you have managed to bring out. You now need to connect it to a source, to ground it. And that is extremely difficult. That's where all the Scorpio challenges come from. Because I want you to think about that from every human being, you have an unlimited amount of tentacles coming out of your head. Just imagine these fine thread-like constructs coming out of your head. Each fine thread that is very ethereal because you can't really see it. Each fine thread conveys a snippet, a quantum of what you really are, or what you're projecting, or what you're trying to be, or what you believe that you are. Now, imagine that there's so many coming out of you. That means it's infinite, literally, okay? And when you meet another human being, that person's thread-like construct and your thread-like construct, they begin to investigate interaction. So that at the end of these thread-like constructs, you have different types of shapes. Now, this is just an analogy. This is the way I teach it, okay? Now, some people have square shapes at the end of their thread-like structures, but the shape is a pimple, meaning it's a socket. It's looking for another square shape from somebody else to plug into the square pimple or the square socket that it has. Once that happens, then along those thread-like structures can flow understanding. So that you and that person tend to get along those thread-like structures. Whatever is being communicated along those thread-like structures, you get along with them. You understand each other on that level. It doesn't mean that you understand each other and all the other thread-like constructs, because there are an infinity of them. There are as many of them as there are concepts in your head of what it is like to be you. Now, if you find enough connections, harmonious connections, meaning a square peg in a square hole and a triangle peg in a triangle hole, you know, if you find enough of them, then you move to the next stage, which is the scorpionic experience. That's really what it is. And the scorpionic experience simply means that those connections that have been forged, right, they now begin to conduct. If you imagine that understanding is some type of electrical impulse, then these thread-like filament structures begin to conduct a tremendous amount of electricity. Tremendous, because it's not just that you found commonality. The person now gets to experience through those thread-like filament structures what it is like to be you. And you get to experience what it is like to be them. In Scorpio, those thread-like structures fuse. So that there are no longer two structures connecting. There's only now one structure that just connects you in some type of esoteric or ethereal, you know, filament structure that just goes from you, from your head to that person's head, and then blends your realities together. When Venus is in Scorpio, this process is done in a very pleasurable, harmonious, and beautiful way, so that the individual attaches a deeper level of meaning to those connections. The connections now plug directly into what it is like to be them from a sensorial point of view, so that the individual, the other half of you, you know, when you are a Venus in Scorpio and you are you've fallen in love with someone, basically, that person, the person's body feels like it's your body. That's why when Venus is in Scorpio and you're in love with someone else, if that person cheats on you, it's not something that you believe that you can even recover from. There is something, even if you carry on the relationship, something is broken. Because it's not just a cheating process, it's a violation of your physical body. That's how the Venus in Scorpio experiences this. Because remember, Venus ties into the material experience of what it is like to be you through your sense organs. And when that connects to another person, it does so as if the sense organs themselves are connected, so that there is a maximum pleasure that is being derived through the process of intimacy. And so the person is able, you are able to feel another person as if the person is you. It's almost like you can see through their eyes. You can listen through their ears. You can taste what through their mouths. There is a connection that is so material and so sensual. You know, you're really keyed into them. And it's the first time probably that you have been able to experience what it is like to be someone else, and someone else experience what it is like to be you. Like I said, this is a very difficult process. And so when the process somehow ends, it doesn't really end for Venus in Scorpio. They do not get over these type of connections, because once the connection is formed, there is no way to unform it. And that is what scares the living daylights out of these people with these placements. Because once they're able to get to that source with you, they cannot undo the process and go back to a reality where this did not exist. And so Scorpios, even though maybe they find themselves in toxic relationships, Venus in Scorpio will make the same mistake over and over and over again until the lesson is learned. And I'll get to the lesson in a bit, because the lesson has to do with setting of boundaries and the nature of sharing. Okay? It's really a very addictive experience once Venus makes this kind of contact with Scorpio, and Venus makes this very strenuous or deep connection with Pluto. Okay, the themes are similar. They're not exactly the same, but the themes are very similar. And so the individual is unable to really pull away. Remember, the Scorpionic experience is simultaneous. It's a simultaneous duality where the individual is drawn to something and completely repulsed by the fear of it. You know, in terms of connecting with someone is great, and attaining this connection is great, but what they walk away. So what Venus in Scorpio ultimately does when they become spooked that somehow the connection is at risk, then instinctively, unconsciously, they go into the Scorpionic experience and begin to manipulate and control. They become very suspicious. They try to gain a control over the environment, over the situation, and and Scorpio doesn't control from the top. It's a very subterranean experience. So they control you without you realizing. They try to control you subterraneanly, meaning they will control you from a secret perspective. That's the whole idea. If by the time you figure out that you're being controlled, then the Scorpio is actually losing grip. So they have become more overt. And that's one of the reasons why the role of Mars as a ruler of Scorpio, I downplay it so much. Because Mars is anything but subterranean. They will smash you over the head right in the open, there and then, so that you know that it's them. But the Scorpio doesn't behave that way. They are very subterranean. They're very subtle. And they believe that if you can fight a war without shooting a single shot, then and win, then that's what's best for everybody. And so the Scorpion, for Venus and Scorpio, they will try to control the relationship so that it reduces or minimizes the fear of loss. But ultimately what happens is that very process is what brings about the loss. It hastens the loss, because relationships don't survive under that type of intense pressure and scrutiny. And so the efforts of the Scorpio backfire. That's the whole point. Once you have a significant placement in Scorpio, there are two aspects to your reality. There is the pre-experience aspect and there's the post-experience aspect. The experience itself is a transformation brought about by pain. Emotional pain. And the result is very simple. Life is trying to teach you that there is no obsessive compulsiveness. In reality, you are self-aware. You're not an automaton. You have to be able to choose. Your choices cannot be made for you, especially when you are afraid. You have to face your fear and stand so that you can bring that fear into the light and overcome it. You have to realize that, look, you have a problem here. And if possible, seek help. That's really what it is. Otherwise, the denial of that is the suppression of that. And once you plant Scorpio into the ground as a seed, then that's exactly where it wants to be. It will now spread all its tentacles subterraneanly to everything. You cannot control everything. Okay? Especially, least of all, a human being that has an entire universe in their head just like you. You cannot force someone to love you. You cannot make someone love you. Alright? It has to be given and offered because that is the true nature of power. And it's also, the Scorpionic experience is a deep lesson for the world because the use of terrorism and fear to try to control other people literally is the experience of manipulation. Okay? Ultimately, it leads to resentment because the human spirit cannot accept that. Okay? So it doesn't matter, that's why empires fall, because they try to use extreme measures of coercion, violence, and manipulation, and lies, and denial, and all these things. They try to coerce people to do what they want, to go in the direction. It only breeds resentment. It has always bred resentment because it goes against the essence of what a human being really is. So this is a lesson when Venus is in Scorpio. It's always a lesson. Once you have significant placements in Scorpio, you are primed to learn a lesson. Now, the narrative surrounding that lesson is the key because these placements are never in isolation. That's why natal chart synthesis is the key. Not analysis, synthesis, because synthesis plugs this narrative into the right context and connects it with every other thing in your chart, because your chart is just one story. Your entire life is one story. So the Venus in Scorpio is plugged in there for a reason. It needs to work with everything else to bring about a very unique type of experience, which you call your life. Okay? So if you think of Venus as a value system of some kind, which is determining what is good for you and what is not good for you, being able to say no. That's what a value system is. The things that you say no to. And then combining that with the Scorpionic impulse, which is basically it's a fear of some kind, the fear of losing control, the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of being naked. And you can, I said something earlier. I said creatures on this planet don't know what it is like to be them. If they did, the first thing they will realize is that they're naked. Because that's the Scorpionic experience. It is the emergence of a type of self-awareness. And the first thing you realize when you become that self-aware is that you're naked. Whoa! And then you rush for cover. That's what you do. That is the Scorpionic experience. You realize just how vulnerable you are. And unconsciously, instinctively, you trigger defenses. You want to hide. You want to cover up. You want to control. You want to minimize the risk. The lesson to be learned is against that instinctive experience. Okay, you're naked. Yeah. But so what? Who isn't? Alright? So from the perspective of money, what's it like for Venus in Scorpio? Because most astrology texts describe Venus as money. That's because in the reality that human beings have created, in order to experience the depth of quality of pleasure and comfort, you need to have money. That's the reality we have created. It's not what Venus codes for. At no point in astrology does anything in astrology code for money. Money is a human construct. Astrology doesn't code for such things. Astrology instead codes, for instance, in the case of Venus, for the type of comfort and pleasure, the type of beauty that you're drawn to, the type of internal harmonization that elicits a response from you. It is around that the human being now constructs ability to exercise this pleasure or this comfort. And in today's world, it simply translates into money. So when Venus is in Scorpio, your sense of beauty comes from a very deep process. And until you experience a qualitative depth to harmony, to beauty, then you are not triggered. The Venusian aspect of you is not activated. And this depth can come in all sorts of forms. For instance, a Venus in Scorpio will be naturally drawn to personalities that have depth to them. So people that exude a sense of mystery, an aura of unknown behavior, personalities that appear dark and reserved. And you know that in our reality, such personalities tend to connote a sense of power. Because to be reserved and to have that level of poise means that there is some type of control around you. And people who exhibit that type of control, it is assumed that they know what they're doing. It doesn't matter that beyond that exterior, if you just dig a little deeper, the Scorpio personalities are in an absolute emotional turmoil. They're like a volcano seething underneath. Their passions are flowing in all directions. They're investigating possibilities that if you could see it, you would see something akin to panic. But the Scorpio will never let you see that. Everything is encased behind a veneer of calmness. But just like the Earth's internal dynamo, which is a ball of iron, molten iron and nickel, spinning in the planet's interior that generates a magnetic field, the Scorpio personality exudes an aura, a very powerful magnetic aura, depending on what is placed in Scorpio, the significant points that are placed in Scorpio. The aura is the magnetic field that is being generated by this internal emotional turmoil within the person. That's really what it is. That's how you spot them. At least those who have significant placements in Scorpio. And if your Venus is in Scorpio, you definitely have significant placements in Scorpio. Your personal planets in Scorpio, you definitely have significant placements in Scorpio. But if Scorpio is rising, that's even worse. And then if any of your personal planets or even your ascendant has Pluto conjuncted, even worse. Okay? So that's really what it is. And so the Venus in Scorpio is drawn to those type of personalities. They're drawn to hidden ways of making money too. They want to be private. They want relationships that are private, very private, because they don't want everyone to know of this vulnerability of theirs, this connection which they have with another person, because it can be exploited. Do you know why? Because that's what they will do if they had the opportunity and they were actually after someone. So within the Scorpio personality, they recognize all the darkness of the world because that's what is within them. They visit those places in their mind. They may never carry out those actions, but they visit them. They know about them and it frightens the living daylights out of them. So that the Scorpio personality is drawn to any intrigue of power. They seem to find themselves caught in these webs because they are sensitive to it. They're drawn to it because of that internal dynamo, those emotions that are churning below the surface. All right? And the thing about these forces is that they're so powerful, they cannot be controlled by the ego per se. The ego needs to learn a type of tangential control, meaning you cannot control it directly. Otherwise, it's too powerful. It will destroy you. So you must learn to control tangentially. So rather than terrorism and using force and coercion, try to love. Try to position yourself as someone who's ready to be there for another. It's a very powerful thing. I don't know if most people realize it. People are drawn to that. And the most stable form of power is the influence that people willingly give you, not because they're terrorized or they're afraid of you, but because they genuinely admire what you stand for. They believe in you. Okay? That's really what it is. So when your Venus is in Scorpio, wherever you make money, you tend to keep it hidden. And maybe for good reason. Maybe it's in your natal chart. You're supposed to keep that hidden so that it's not sabotaged externally or something like that. And maybe your lessons revolve around that. You cannot know until everything is integrated within the chart in the natal synthesis. That's why if you're having concerns about that, don't just listen to Venus and Scorpio podcast and say, oh yes, that must be my life lesson. It's not necessarily the case. You have to come for synthesis. Do not draw any conclusions from your chart if it has not been synthesized, so that you get the overall perspective. Okay? That's really what it is. Otherwise, it's kind of dangerous. So that's for the kind of people Venus in Scorpio is drawn to, and the type of financial situations they're drawn to. They're drawn to partnerships like that. And they're also scared of partnerships because Venus in Scorpio does not experience what you would call good fortune in partnerships. And that's because of all that we have discussed. It's the fear. And the fear leads to behavior that ultimately creates that which it is afraid of. So that the cycle continues until the unconscious behavior can be brought to the surface, so that the human being can start to try getting in front of this. You see, they cannot remove it, but you can get in front of it and realize what triggers you in that manner. And so you don't want to be with a partner that constantly triggers all your insecurities. You want to be with a partner that at least understands how you function. That's what it means to share a reality with someone. That's what the Scorpio experience is. To find somebody that is as close to you as possible, that sharing is so easy. It's almost like you're of one body and one mind. That's what Scorpio really dreams of. If we define that as the truest form of love with another, then what Scorpio really is after when Venus is in Scorpio is the deepest and most bonding true love. So that's really what it is, Venus in Scorpio. I mean, you can think of any other placement in Scorpio, just insert, but the functional lights themselves, the planets, each one has what I call a pure form that is never really experienced. So once you get the pure form, you now plug it into the sign. The problem always comes from the sign because there are no planets really. When you have Venus in Scorpio, there's nothing. But at that degree where Venus finds itself in Scorpio, Scorpio needs to produce a pure form of Venus. Meaning it needs to mimic the effects of Venus. And some signs are better suited to mimicking some planets than others. Alright? For instance, when the moon finds itself in Gemini, if you know what the moon is, Gemini struggles. Because they seem to be antithetical to each other, even though they're not. Natal chart synthesis, which I teach, focuses on the qualitative nature of these signs and how they are really all the same. So that if you come on a class that I teach, you will see why all the signs are the same, such that they're really not 12 signs. There's only 6, and then you can actually shrink that 6 into 1. That's really what it is. And then the planets, 10 planets, you can always, astrology has a meaning that goes way deeper than, the superficial meaning of these that we read in books and, and grab from the internet and things like that. It's way deeper. And because of that, it is possible to write about astrological secrets in ways which you will not know that they're writing about astrology. That's really what it is. Because they will never mention explicitly that they're writing about astrology. So, because they're writing about it that's as close to the true form as possible. And once they do that, you will miss all of it because you don't know that that's what you're reading. You have no idea this is astrological. Okay? Because they're talking about the signs and the planets from perspectives that are so deep. Now, until you understand what these deep perspectives are, then the secrets remain hidden. And that's why I teach, the classes that I do. And thankfully, I've had a lot of students. I still want more because, there's a lot there. And once you engage in the classes, you will just be transported into a different way of knowing. A different way of seeing. I always tell people that once the understanding is there, then the world in front of your eyes completely transforms. It's like something awakes within you. I mean, even for advanced astrologers. You see, because today astrology tends to focus on techniques. The technical terms are there. They will always be there. But you have to understand from first principles what they mean, what they all mean. And once you understand first principles, then everything else is just a derivative. So you can have a first derivative, a second derivative, and as many derivatives as you want. But first principle is always key.